I would love to see who is out there. We've got 40 people have already joined us. It'd be lovely to see where you are coming from, where you are joining us from. We'll be starting in 30 seconds or so. Toronto, as always, I appreciate people from the Americas joining us, because I know it must be really, really early over there. Poland, Singapore, Malaysia, Macedonia, India, fantastic. Istanbul, the Netherlands, this is great. Australia, wow, okay. What time is it in Australia? I don't know how many hours ahead you are, 12 or 13. Vietnam in quarantine, 8 p.m. Okay, that's not too painful. All right, excellent. We've had a lot of people signing up for this webinar. Clearly, it's one that everyone wants to take ownership of, as the webinar title is itself. It's something that, I don't know about you, but I mean, I like the exhibition, but it does throw up its challenges. So it's clearly one that we need to talk about. So today's webinar is all about trying to build in the exhibition prompts into your course, into your lessons, into your units, so that students, when they come to do the exhibition, aren't looking at the list of 35 prompts and thinking, what on earth am I going to do with that? They already know what the prompts are. They come across them regularly in lessons, in the units, in our case, the big questions that they are looking at for the units, and they're perfectly comfortable with handling the exhibition prompts. So just a quick outline of what we're looking at. I'll just go through a quick bit of housekeeping and show you how the webinar will work. Just want to remind all of us about what the exhibition prompts are. That should be pretty straightforward. Think a little bit about why they are challenging for students. I mean, we're all, I'm sure, fantastic TOK teachers and very good at putting ourselves into the shoes of our students. I think we need to constantly be doing that in the course, and certainly when it comes to the exhibition, we need to be doing that. And then I've kind of divided section 4 up into various different parts. So first of all, how do we link the prompts to overall teaching units? Then how do you do it within individual lessons? How do we use the 12 key concepts? Because I think they are a fantastic tool to use in the TOK course for taking ownership of the exhibition and the exhibition prompts. How do we link real life situations to the prompts? We need to use key thinkers as well. Those two things, D and E, I will talk about why they are. I think they have particular significance. And that's it. I will just briefly go over some of the upcoming webinars and show you some of the webinar recordings. I've been doing quite a lot of webinars recently, so I'll give you links to those. And then just talk about what site membership will offer in the coming year. I'm working incredibly hard, too hard. I should be on holiday, but I'm working very hard on updating the site and its resources so that there's a lot of new material and new tools and new ways of using the site to help you with TOK in the coming year. I apologize if you're Southern Hemisphere and I'm talking about new academic years coming up in September. I don't take it for granted that some of you will be starting next year, as I was doing up until recently in Peru. So yeah, apologies for that. I'm not a sort of Northern Hemisphere orientated person. I do know you guys exist as well. So it's just that this is probably the busiest time of the year for most people, because we're all preparing and thinking about the year ahead. Okay, so the webinar should last about an hour. We'll see how we go. I tend to ramble on and sometimes need to stop myself. So hopefully we'll have time for a few questions at the end, but it will be about an hour. I am Michael Dunn. If you haven't seen one of these webinars before, I'm the creator of theoryofknowledge.net, which has been around for quite a few years now, about 10 years. I run the site. We publish a newsletter. There's lots of free content. If you haven't seen the site, well, I'm sure you have, because you're here. But there's a lot of stuff, I hope, for everyone, particularly for the members who have access to all of the lessons and the other resources that we produce to, we hope, help you make TOK a brilliant experience for everyone. If you have questions and messages, I would say don't fire them off at me yet. We may have time for me to have a look at them at the end of the webinar. It's probably best to use the Q&A rather than the chat, because I tend to wipe the chat and all of your sometimes brilliant questions disappear. So the Q&A I actually have saved. So Send me a few questions on the Q&A if you want later on in the webinar. Otherwise, you can send me an email. I'll be very happy to respond to those questions when I send out the debrief email, which will also give you a link to the recording of this session and to the presentation itself. So you will have all of this material and be able to access everything that we've talked about today. I should be sending that out later on today. We'll see how we go. Okay, so simply, I guess, what are the exhibition prompts? Well, of course, the exhibition prompts are those 35 questions which are designed to frame the students' commentaries that they are writing on the TOK exhibition as they discuss the objects that they have chosen, the 3 objects. Now, this second bullet point is we're already getting into sort of murky waters here. It's recommended that the context of commentaries should be the core or the optional themes. However, it's not mandatory, and you are not marked on that. You are not assessed on the extent to which you link your commentaries, your responses to the prompts, to the themes, which already indicates, I think, that that is one complication for the exhibition already. And in actual fact, you can use different themes for the different objects. I'll come back to that in the last bullet point. I'll come back to that in a second. But none of the prompts, unlike the TOK essays in the past, at least, none of the prompts refer explicitly to the themes or obviously to the areas of knowledge. So they're designed to be quite broad prompts that can be interpreted in quite a number of ways and explored within almost limitless contexts. The prompts are quite conceptual. I think there are some ideas there which are quite tricky. A lot of them have a key concept built into them. Remember those 12 key concepts that have been introduced for the new syllabus, which I will come back to later on in the webinar, which already, I think, shows how useful the 12 concepts can be to help students to understand and respond to the prompts. Okay, so as I've said, there's no assessment target based on making links to specific aspects of the TOK course. And I think that informs the way we design our TOK courses, because I don't think we should be too narrow in forcing students to do, right, the next 3 weeks we're doing on language, the next 3 weeks we're doing on religion, on knowledge and religion. Then we're going to do indigenous societies. Then we're going to do knowledge and the knower. If you do that with the intention of them drawing on that specific content when they come to write their exhibitions, I think A, you're going to have designed probably quite a boring, contrived course. And B, the students are going to be thinking, well, where does it mention what we've been doing specifically? Where does it mention this? So, you know, I think, and I've always thought this with TOK, that everything should be interlinked. And this is why, you know, I think our structure for the course, the 6 big questions, which can be explored in a number of different ways via different themes and different areas of knowledge, is the way to go, because you just don't need that depth of knowledge on language in order to answer the exhibition prompts. I think it's worth saying here, and I have discussed this in another webinar on the exhibition, the 3 objects can be discussed completely separately. Okay, so when students are responding to that prompt, they can write 3 completely separate paragraphs on the 3 objects. They do not have to be interlinked. They can even be written, as I've just sort of hinted, on different themes. So you can have, you know, object number 1 discussed in the context of language, object number 2 discussed in the context of politics, object number 3 discussed in the context of technology. One reason for not doing that might be that it involves more work for students, but there's absolutely no reason why they can't do that. And you know, they can even use a non-theme context, if that makes sense, that doesn't relate entirely to one of the optional themes or the core theme itself. Of course, the thing that all of the different sections, the 3 different sections, must do is they must respond to the prompt as it is. Okay, so if they're not doing that, then clearly they're gonna go completely off track and it will be a disaster. But there's no reason for them whatsoever to interlink their objects. They don't have to relate. apart from linking to the exhibition prompt. So that's quite a big thing, I think, and I think that's a good thing, because I think it allows us to design an interesting course, a course that's kind of more natural when it comes to looking at knowledge, which, the nature of knowledge is pretty chaotic and overflowing, and it goes everywhere, and it can't be sort of neatly compartmentalized as some people would like to do when they come to design their course. So sort of veer away from that if you can, and design a more free-flowing organic course, which I will try and show you how we do. Okay, so that's what the prompts are, the 35 IA prompts. So let's try and think about them from the perspective of a student. Why are they challenging? Why are they difficult for students? Why are students going to run into problems when they come to respond to them with their exhibition commentary? Well, first of all, I think some of them are quite hard to grasp in themselves. They have complicated concepts linked to them. They have ideas that they might not instinctively, naturally get. So they're going to need help with some of them. Having said that, there are 35 of them. So there's a lot of options for students to choose from. And I always say, don't sort of break your back trying to understand every single IA prompt or the essay prescribed titles. If there's one that just isn't resonating with you, then let's avoid it and let's choose something else. So even though some of them are quite tricky, there's plenty to choose from, I think, for students. Okay, then there's the usual difficulties, challenges of interpreting the assessment instrument, the wording of the assessment instrument. Now, I think this has gotten a lot better in TOK. If you're an old timer when it comes to TOK and you remember not even the last syllabus, but the syllabus before that, the assessment instrument was enormous for the essay and for the presentation, with lots of different sort of sections to it, loads of different things to understand. So it's definitely been clarified, it's definitely been simplified, but it still has difficulties. I think certain sort of concepts that aren't that easy to evaluate. For example, it refers to using appropriate evidence as you explore a prompt. Now, what does that mean? What is appropriate evidence? I think for me, appropriate evidence is using referencing to real life situations, things going on, so sort of linking the object and the discussion of the object to the wider world and what's going on in the wider world. I think appropriate evidence can be the ideas of key thinkers who we come across in the course. And I think appropriate evidence is well-argued ideas from the student themselves, their opinions justified by proper reasoning, coherent arguments. I think there's a difficulty when the students come to trying to establish the objects and the prompts. How do you link the two? Well, this is where the context comes in, I think, which as we've said, doesn't have to be linked to, doesn't have to be one specific theme. It can be several themes. How should they be drawing on the course? Like I say, I think maybe when it comes to students who struggle a little bit more, you can be a little more prescriptive in encouraging them to choose a single theme. But for students who are a little more ambitious, they can definitely play around a little bit more and refer to more than one theme when they come to discuss their objects. So there's a challenge there. Should prompts be answered definitively? The prompts are questions. Okay, so should we be trying to give a definitive answer? The answer to that is no. The IB themselves have been quite clear on that, which is good. So students shouldn't be thinking, I've got to answer that, I've got to arrive at a conclusion. I think it's worth remembering again the advice of the IB when it comes to beginning each of the sections, the three sections of the commentary. You say something like, this object is interesting in helping us explore the prompt because ... So it's a lot more discursive than sort of a definitive answer that we're looking for. I think the number of prompts can make it quite difficult for students. I think they'll be overwhelmed the first time they see the 35 prompts. They'll go, wow, what am I meant to do with all of those? But I think, if you are building the 35 prompts into your course over a period of time, rather than thrusting them at the end of the course, your students will be fine. And actually, they'll go from thinking, wow, that's a lot to deal with, to that gives me a lot of options. So I think their mindset will change as long as you sort of introduce them in a kind of drip feed approach. Several of the prompts have quite similar wording. For example, the last two prompts, 34 and 35, refer to the acquisition and to the production of knowledge. So we've got to be careful about how we interpret words. Again, you know, the teachers themselves should be playing quite a good role in that, and ensuring that they have quite a precise understanding of the prompts. That doesn't necessarily mean a sort of strict dictionary interpretation, you know, as the Oxford English Dictionary says, ... You know, you don't have to go that way, but, you know, make sure that the students have a clear, coherent, and consistent understanding of the prompt, and you can help them with that. Of course, there's no reason why you can't sort of guide them. None of them should be dealing with a prompt when they come to writing their exhibition and thinking, I really don't understand that. So you shouldn't be in that situation. There's enough options there, and you are allowed to help them. So that shouldn't happen. Okay, so those are some of the difficulties, I think, with the prompt. So let's look at what my kind of solution is to dealing with the prompts, to making sure that students get used to them before they're doing the exhibition, to making sure that they, you know, they're really happy with what they're doing, because I think this is what we should be aiming for if we can, making the students happy about taking on assessment tasks. I know that's challenging with the essay. I think at least with my own students, they're often happy afterwards, but sometimes during it's a little bit of an ordeal for them, but they're really proud of the piece of work. I think with the presentation previously, my students have always found it a lot more fun and interesting, partly because they're working in a group. Now they're not doing that, but still we want them to enjoy what they're doing. We want them to be eager about choosing their objects that have meaning for them, that have maybe changed them as knowers. So we want them to be enthusiastic as much as we can, and I think, you know, that's where we need to embed the prompts in what we do, so that they sort of naturally absorb them and understand them before they start writing their exhibition commentaries. Okay, so the way we at theoryofknowledge.net structure the course is we don't follow what I would call the shopping list approach to TOK, which I have taught in the past. When I first started teaching TOK, I divided up my course into, as it was then, ways of knowing and areas of knowledge. We had sort of 4 weeks on language, we moved on to natural sciences, then we went to history, etc., etc. And we went through it like that. And I mean, I was always dissatisfied with that. It always seemed a little bit contrived. It didn't set, I didn't feel it set the students up very well for taking on the essays at the end, or really the presentations as it was then. They were expecting, you know, to have questions to deal with that were much more based on those units that we had looked at. So I kind of transitioned to a more conceptual approach to TOK, driven by a very good friend of mine who worked in my last school, who was an absolute pain in the neck, but he was brilliant, because every time he came back and said, you know, how does this relate to the bigger picture? How does this relate to the bigger picture? And I realized that the units needed a different structure. So instead of the shopping list approach, we use a big question approach. Each unit is based on a question. Those questions align quite nicely to the essay. And I was quite nervous when I first saw the IA prompts. How are these going to work with my approach to teaching TOK? They work beautifully, really, really well. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. So the questions that I use to drive my course can be aligned so well to all of the 35 IA prompts. Now, I'm not necessarily forcing my approach to TOK on you. I just strongly advise you to structure your course via a sort of more conceptual approach by your own questions if you have them. So each unit, each sort of, well, around 6 weeks or so we take for each unit, is answering a question that will then help them with the assessment task and be a more interesting way of approaching knowledge. So I'll show you the big questions in a minute, or remind you of them if you are using of them. if you are going to go with your own questions, think about the prompts as you're doing it, as you're designing your questions. Fortunately, I didn't have to redo my questions. As I said, they align very well, but think about those prompts and make sure that they work with what you're coming up with. There are other massive advantages of not using the shopping list approach to TOK and having a question-based approach to your units. If you're asking questions that, rather than say, doing it in terms of history, now we're doing mathematics, it means that those questions can be answered by every single teacher in your school. We are obviously trying to diffuse TOK through the school. We want everyone teaching TOK. We want everyone drawing on TOK. TOK is a fantastic way of enriching every subject. It should be done in the IB diploma. Of course, everyone should be doing it. I think it helps raise grades. It gives you a more critical approach to knowledge. I'm a history teacher as well, and obviously, drawing on TOK concepts is a fantastic way of enriching history essays and examination answers. So we should all be doing TOK, and having questions is a great way of ensuring that every teacher can at any point be doing what we are doing in TOK, whereas they're kind of shut out of it if right now we're doing maths, or right now we're doing natural sciences. How will I as an economics teacher sort of play a role in that? Well, you can just about find a way of aligning, but it's too much work really for most of us because we're very overworked. So that's one advantage, massively conducive for integration of the whole of the DP. I think question driven is just the way to go when as much as you can when you're learning. It sort of puts you in immediate gear to be traveling along this path. I think it more accurately reflects the nature of knowledge as well, having sort of these big questions that are answered via lots of different themes and areas of knowledge rather than just one. So I just think it's a much better way of organizing the course. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, let me show you very specifically. So these are our big questions, 6 big questions. The first one looks at sort of the fundamental nature of knowledge, not just theory of knowledge, but knowledge itself. We move on to think about values and the relationship between our knowledge and how we construct our values. Then we look at the way we communicate knowledge and how we can spin ideas and lead people astray consciously or unconsciously. Big question 4 is all about perspectives and how we might have a completely different view of the world to other perspectives. Then we think about development, creativity, how a new idea is created, how does knowledge change over time? And finally, we think, the sort of culmination of the course, how we become experts, how we become discerning knowers. Okay, so all of those align to loads of the IA prompts. So I've just given some examples there. But if you know the IA prompts, and I'm sort of gradually memorizing all 35 of them, I'm getting some of the way. I'm not there yet, but I know them pretty well now. They can all be aligned to one of those questions. Okay, so we begin with big question 1. We're close to IA prompt 1 and 5. What counts as knowledge? What counts as good evidence for a claim? Values it plays a very big role in the TOK course now. It's sort of we don't, if you're familiar with the old syllabus, we don't look at ethics as an area of knowledge anymore. We look at values throughout the course. So in what ways do our values affect our acquisition of knowledge? IA prompt 27 is all about ethical obligations of knowledge. So lovely, it works really well with our second unit. In terms of communication, what challenges are raised by the communication of knowledge? That's just perfect. It's almost exactly what we're asking with our big question. How might context influence if knowledge is accepted or rejected? So context really, really important in terms of how you present your ideas. Perspectives is huge in the IA prompts. There's loads of IA prompts that link to perspectives. Here are just 2 of them. So is bias inevitable in the production of knowledge? So big question 4, we look a lot at bias, unconscious bias. If you're familiar with Julia Galef's work, the scout mindset versus the soldier mindset, which I absolutely love. Is objectivity possible in the production or acquisition of knowledge? Really, really nice. How is new knowledge about the world created? Big question 5. You've got 2 questions there. How can we know if knowledge is an improvement upon past knowledge? What role does imagination play in producing knowledge? So again, they align beautifully with that big question. And then finally, how do we become discerning knowers? I mean, you could almost align that big question to all of the IA prompts, but here are two that it works quite nicely with. Number 19, what counts as a good justification for a claim? So if you're an expert, if you're a discerning knower, how would you make a good justification to support what you're saying? And what role do experts play in influencing our acquisition of knowledge? Obviously, that depends on your definition of what an expert is, but clearly we're using the same wording there as the big question itself. So this just gives you an indication of how well all of the IA prompts link to our units. And within our units, I designed some lessons that run little practice exhibitions, 2 practice exhibitions before they do the final exhibition. So in Big Question 2, when we do that unit, we are doing a practice exhibition. So we look at all of the prompts linked to values, and I get my students to choose just from those. So you've got probably 8 or 9 prompts related to values, which automatically sort of cuts down, gets rid of 20 odd prompts, just gets them focusing on values. But to find those, obviously they have to read through all of the IA prompts. And that is a really nice process of sort of getting rid of those ones. We're not going to use those ones, and these are the ones we have. So it gets them processing what the IA prompts are. And then we come back in Big Question number 4, we do another practice exhibition all about perspectives and biases. And again, I get them to do the same thing, look through all of the 35 prompts, which ones relate to perspectives and biases. Again, we've got sort of 8 or 9 prompts that directly link to that. And again, they've processed all of the IA prompts. So by the time they do the final exhibition, which I time for Big Question number 5, then they're totally ready. They've been through the list a couple of times. They've seen how the prompts align to the unit titles, to the big questions, and they're really comfortable with doing the exhibition. Now you'll see that there's a final unit which I actually deliver after the exhibition, but because all of the presentations, the lesson presentations are ready, you can give them access to that if you want, and guide them if they're going that direction with their choice of IA prompts and objects. Okay, so that's kind of the macro picture, the bigger picture, if you like, how units can be linked to IA prompts. So that's my first way in which I build the IA prompts into the TAK course. That would be your beginning point. If you're not using these big questions, you're using something similar, that's what I would be thinking as I came up with my questions or my titles for my units. Okay, so then we need to think we need to think a little more micro and go in on the lessons themselves. Last year, when we sort of when we hadn't quite sort of got our teeth into the exhibition, I gave an indication on the final slide of my lesson presentations how whether this lesson might link generally to the exhibition, but I didn't really say how. And someone fantastically suggested to me, a customer, great customer in China who's often given me fantastic advice. Why don't you make a clearer link, a more explicit link to the exhibition prompts? And that's exactly what I did. So now when you look at the lesson presentations, again, it doesn't have to be something you do via us. You can do it yourself. I'll show you how we do it in a second. There's now an explicit link within every lesson to the IA prompts. But you don't even have to make it explicit. Your lesson titles can be based on the IA prompts or be related to IA prompts. Your lesson objectives as well. Try and be guided by the IA prompts again, because many of them are asking fantastic sort of ideas and concepts that you can use as your lesson objective, and of course the concepts themselves that you build into your lessons. So this has all worked very well for us because we were kind of doing it all already. Now we've just kind of gone ahead and made it more explicit to help you as a teacher with your students and to help the students themselves. And of course, if you're using the Google lesson presentations that we produce, you're uploading them to Google Classroom. So at the end, you know, that I don't like textbooks. I'd much rather give them the things that I've produced and the things that they've produced. So at the end of the course, you know, they've got access to this wonderful range of lesson presentations and ideas that they can access via Google Classroom, and I find it a much more helpful way of supporting them than chucking a textbook at them. Okay, so how does this look like in a lesson? So this is a lesson from big question number 2. This is the 9th lesson that we teach. Value free or value laden. It's all about, well, you can see from the lesson objective itself. I can assess whether scientific and mathematical knowledge can and should be produced in a value free way. So you can already see how that links to the IA prompt that we've already come across. I'll quickly flick back to that. So in what ways do our values affect our acquisition of knowledge? And it even links a little bit to IA prompt 27, but you can see how, you know, it will help them directly with that final IA prompt, but also 35, which looks at the production of knowledge. Okay, so I might be mentioning that at this point, but on the other hand, this is only the 2nd unit that they've done, so I might not be overburdening them with references to the exhibition. But of course, you know, if your students choose one of those 2 final IA prompts, you can say to them, hey, think about using lesson 9 from big question 2. Go to Google Classroom, you'll see some ideas there, you'll see some key thinkers there, etc., etc., and they can go to that lesson presentation and use it to help them construct their commentary and answer the IA prompt. So this is the title slide for that lesson. I'm just showing you that so you can recognize it if you do use these lessons. And this is the slide in the lesson which explicitly links this lesson to the IA prompt. Okay, so you know, we're talking there about the production of knowledge, right? Actually, so this is IAP 35 rather than 34. So refer to the ideas from this lesson to answer this question. This might be something that you show them in class and get them talking about it in class. It might be something that you could give them to do for homework if you do that kind of thing, or flipping the class if you do that kind of thing. Or it can be something you just save there, see for yourself, and then, as I've said, direct them if they're doing this IA prompt, direct them to this lesson, and this will give them a little bit of help. So, for example, how can our values impinge on the way scientific and mathematical knowledge is produced? All of that is discussed in this lesson. Does this undermine, I should say undermines, or strengthen the integrity of the knowledge? So some questions there, and I make my lesson presentations very, very visual. I choose my images with a lot of care, and so each lesson presentation has loads of images, loads of objects, which they could use directly themselves, or just think about, well, what kind of objects would I use in order to discuss these kind of things. Now, this is science and mathematics. So, you know, remember the recommendation is for a theme. You can do an area of knowledge, but it's recommended that it's a theme. I might perhaps edge them towards thinking about this in terms of knowledge in the knower, maybe, and think about other sort of themes that they can apply it to. But this lesson, we've been discussing science and mathematics, but it's a very short distance from that to applying these kind of questions to other aspects of the course, to the themes. This is the final lesson slide. Actually, this is from a different lesson. I can't remember which lesson this is, but I just give an indication there of which aspects of the course the lesson will link to, and you can see highlighted in pink. I give 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 recommendations of IA prompts that link to that lesson. So they get that slide here, first of all, giving them detailed sort of links to the IA prompts, and then they get a few more suggestions there, and which you could maybe help them with, or which they can look at themselves. And again, they can consult later on in the course when everything is added to Google Classroom. Okay, so that's the way in which I link individual lessons to the IA prompts. I don't want to do it in a contrived way, which is why it's quite nice that I haven't really had to redesign lessons. I've just sort of added those slides. I've just made it a bit more explicit. So I'm not really changing what we do. I'm just making it clearer, the links between the content of our lessons and the IA prompts, which very happily works quite well and quite naturally. Okay, so then we move on to the key concepts. So how do you link the key concepts to the IA prompts? I think the 12 key concepts are fantastic. I think actually I've just had an idea for a very simple resource, which is just printing out those 12 key concepts. I think I'm going to do that. So I think, you know, having them displayed around the wall would be fantastically helpful. I'm guessing a lot of you have already done that. Yeah, just making them aware of the 12 key concepts. I'm building in the 12 key concepts a lot more in lessons. Actually, I don't think we've got an example of it here, but in my lessons, I actually, for any of the 12 key concepts that appear in my lesson presentations, they appear in red type. So anytime we come to a slide with a key concept on, the students know, it's one of the 12 key concepts, which you can make more of. I'm also with the newsletter and the real life situations that we use to drive the course. We're linking the 12 key concepts to those stories and those media sources as well. So the 12 key concepts are a central part of TOK now. I think they're good for loads of other reasons. I think they're a good way of integrating TOK with other subjects, because I think, you know, you can give the 12 key concepts to other teachers and say, you know, these are central to the course. If you're doing nothing else, you know, talk about truth, talk about evidence, talk about you know, values, perspectives, etc., etc. These are the kind of things that we do in TOK, and it gives a fantastic introduction to the nature of TOK, which is what some non-TOK teachers sometimes struggle with. So, you know, encouraging your students to use the 12 key concepts, you know, within their commentary is a great way of making sure that they're exploring the prompts and talking about their objects in a suitable way, in a very kind of TOK friendly way. And of course, quite a few of the key concepts are mentioned explicitly in the IA prompts. I actually went through and counted it. I think something like 11 of the IA prompts have a key concept. I don't think it's quite 12, and some of them are repeated. You know, some of them are more important than others in terms of the IA prompts. But they are there. They're there in the actual wording of the prompts. So, you know, there's a direct link between the key concepts and the IA prompts. So we designed I hope a nice little resource, a useful little resource, which is simply a document for every single key concept. So for each of the 12 key, you've got 12 documents, one for each of the key concepts. Here's an example. So I'm going to take you out of that presentation for a second. So this is evidence, okay. And you know, we've got a little starting point for evidence if you want to do a lesson on evidence with students. We've got some quotes on evidence. I like interlinking the different key concepts. I think they work very well off each other. So there's ways in which you can interlink evidence with certainty, justification, objectivity, etc. Obviously, you're trying to link the key concept to the course. So, you know, which areas of knowledge, which themes does it sort of link quite nicely to? I mean, you can do that in so many different ways. Those are just sort of 5 very, very simple ideas. And here's the link to the Tok exhibition. So, you know, there are 3 very, very sort of clear IA prompts that link to evidence, 3, 5, and 31. And so, you know, you've got some guidance there on how you would link that particular key concept to the prompts. There are links there to the big questions, and there's a lot here as well. There are loads and loads of real life situations, media sources there that you can explore, all to do with evidence. And I've also sort of cross-linked them with my big questions, so values. So you know, let's maybe just click on one of those to give you an idea. All right, I mean, this is one of the stories of the moment. You know, where did COVID come from? Which is a really interesting story. So I think that links to creativity, the idea that the creation of new ideas. it's all about evidence. You know, what have we got evidence for? What is just sort of politically motivated sort of ideas? And it's really hard to distinguish between those. So although this is sort of more linked to the natural sciences, there's a lot of politics here. I think there's also knowledge in the knower. You know, what might we be more what might we seize onto with more alacrity? That the idea that this country started it or this country is lying about it. You know, it's a wonderful TOK story with evidence, I think, at the heart of it. Okay, so we'll go back to our exhibition. Sorry, to our presentation. We've just rewound a little bit. Let's just go back to where we were. All right, so those are the 12 key concepts. Let's just click through. And as I say, I definitely think the 12 key concepts are an asset. I think they are something to help us and help students rather than another level of learning for them to sort of have to face up to. I think they're there to be used as a helping hand, as a support. So, you know, students shouldn't be afraid of them. They're just, you know, really nice central ideas for us to focus on as we are exploring the course. Okay, so yeah, we mentioned at the beginning, you know, one of the challenges maybe for students and for teachers is figuring out what is meant by appropriate evidence. How do we support our ideas in the commentary with appropriate evidence? How do we explore the prompts and justify our claims with appropriate evidence? As I've said, I think appropriate evidence for me is sort of linking the object in the discussion to the wider world, to real life situations and issues going on. And I think that's the first way, and I think the second one is linking it to the ideas of key thinkers. I think those are two good ways that you can offer appropriate evidence. So as I've said there, I think real life situations serve two purposes when it comes to the exhibition task. Remember, the overall aim in the TOK exhibition is to demonstrate how TOK concepts manifest in the real world. So obviously, if you're drawing on real life situations, events, issues, you're doing that. So that's on a sort of on a bigger scale. And you know, secondly, as we've said, I think this is one of our aspects of appropriate evidence to support arguments, to support points that are being made. So I would encourage you to, you know, when you come across real life situations, you know, this is again why I don't really advocate textbooks. I much prefer to, I mean, you can use both, of course, textbooks and the real world, but I much prefer news. I much prefer events going on in the real world, media sources. I want my students reading articles. I want them watching videos. You know, I want them directly connected to the real world. I don't want anyone offering a kind of a middle person sort of arrangement. You know, I'm going to take these things and interpret them for you, and this is what I think about them. I try not to do that myself, and our resources are designed to put students in touch with those media sources rather than sort of giving an interpretation. Okay, so I'm burbling there. Let me show you what that looks like in the newsletter. So every month, if you're a member, you'll be aware that we publish a newsletter. We look at some of the big stories going on in the world. We try and make it as diverse as possible. We can't always do that because a lot of media sources have paywalls. So we only use media sources that everyone can access, although certain countries, I think, have certain access limitations to them. This is one from CNN. This was the recent story about Joe Biden referring to the Tulsa massacre as a massacre and not a riot. So this is a lovely TOK story. I think primarily to do with the language, but also, of course, linking to history, and we've got politics in there. So this is what it looks like in the newsletter. If you remember, you get 20 of these stories. If you can sign up to the free version, which gives you a little bit less. So obviously you get a link to the story itself. Key terms, we've got some words that often, you know, I include the key concepts there, which again, you know, might relate very directly to the IA prompt. And well, you can see the rest of it for yourself. There's a little bit of help in how you might use this in the classroom, but that's for the purpose of this webinar. That's the interesting thing. An explicit link to an exhibition prompt that this article could help you with. And I think this is all to do with context, and the context in which you are sort of expressing your ideas and the way you're framing your words. So I think this links very, very nicely to IAP 24. You get students to have a look at that and link it to this story, and suddenly, they've got a really nice piece of evidence in order to discuss that. Hopefully linking it again well, obviously linking it again to their object, and maybe the story itself might encourage them and help them to choose their object. So, you get a link to all of the stories that we use in the newsletter in that kind of way, and hopefully this will help them to understand and help them gather appropriate evidence for their commentaries. Okay, finally, I also think that appropriate evidence comes from the ideas of key thinkers. We look at a lot of fantastic key thinkers in theoryofknowledge.net. Knowledge heroes, we call them. We've got a new resource, or relatively new resource, which looks at the idea of 100 thinkers. So I think referencing their theories, opinions, quotes, etc., of all these wonderful people will help to support arguments in a commentary. I think adds authority to commentaries. I think it tightens up their claims. And I think this is part of a great education, isn't it? We should all be coming across the ideas of wonderful people, even if we disagree with them. We should be aware of them. Now, I suppose there's one little danger here. You have to be careful that the ideas of key thinkers, of other thinkers, don't overshadow the ideas of students. So you should be encouraging them to use these ideas to support what they're saying rather than replace what they're saying. But as long as you do that, I think this will only strengthen a commentary and help them to answer the IA prompt. So as I said, we have a specific resource on the site which members can access called Knowledge Heroes. It looks at about 100, slightly more than 100 key thinkers, how they relate to the course, where they appear in the lessons that we produce. And again, this is what we've just added, an explicit link to an IA prompt that their ideas could help you with. So again, this is how that looks. So it's a PDF, this document, and you will go through it and you'll see loads and loads of amazing thinkers. Those are 3 of them there. So let's focus on Leslie Hazelton, an absolutely wonderful writer and thinker and speaker. Talks a lot about knowledge and religion, which it obviously is an optional theme, could certainly form the context for a commentary. She talks a lot about doubt and certainty, which is one of our key concepts. Certainty. It links directly to assessment prompt 8. So you can use her ideas to support a commentary answering that IA prompt. And you can see we've got 2 others there. Hannah Critchlow is a scientist, but she talks a lot about bias and links to knowledge and the knower. Thomas Kuhn, perhaps more linked to the natural sciences, so maybe your students won't go that way. They prefer to use the recommended context, which is the themes. But I've put links for every single thinker there, even if they're more related to an area of knowledge rather than theme. So I hope that resource will be a really useful tool for students and for teachers when they're gathering appropriate evidence and when they're just meeting fantastic thinkers and ideas. Okay, that's it. That's what I got for you. That's how I'm building links to the exhibition prompts into lessons. As I said, I don't want to overdo it. I don't want it to be a course that's just about the IA prompts. But I think we've got the balance right between making a few links, which you don't have to do every lesson. Obviously, you don't have to show that slide every lesson. You can if you want, or you can use it afterwards and say to the students, you know, have a look at that lesson again, because it relates to what you're doing, your prompt. But I don't think we've overloaded them. I think it's just there if you want to use it. I think also it shows how, you know, the bigger picture, we should be designing our units around the IA prompts and aligning unit titles with the 35 IA prompts. Okay, so I've given quite a few webinars recently, and I'm going to be giving more. So first of all, I'm designing a huge new resource, which actually is, as always, taking on a bit of a life of its own. It's becoming bigger than I thought it was going to be. So it's a little bit slower to get out, but it's called Investigating Issues, and it's all about using not just individual real life situations, but whole kind of issues to drive the TOK course, which you can view via that link. I did a paid webinar the other day on designing great TOK lessons. That's now available as a recording, so you can purchase the recording there and see the video in your own time. I did a really nice thing the other day with some ex-students of mine who've set up a fantastic new company helping students around the world, specifically South America, but it could be used by any student, to get into international universities. And I gave them my thoughts on how I thought TOK and critical thinking helps to make candidates really strong for universities. So it's another free one that you can watch there. On the 19th of August, so later on in the summer, I've got a bit of a break now, which is nice, but yeah, in a month or so, I'll be doing a webinar which is designed for students with a price to kind of reflect that. It's a very affordable premium webinar, all about demystifying TOK. So how students can go into it with a positive frame of mind and not be too freaked out by this strange and weird course. So that's on the 19th of August. And then on the 2nd of September, I'm doing a webinar which will help you introduce TOK to the rest of your DP faculty, so to non-TOK teachers. I did one of those a couple of years ago, which was quite popular, but that was for the presentation and for the essay. So now we need to update the course a little bit. We've got a new syllabus, so I'm doing another one on the 2nd of September. I realize that some of you will have already started school, but hopefully putting it at the beginning of September will mean that it can still be used by you as you begin the new school year if you are a Northern Hemisphere school. For Southern Hemisphere people, I will do another of those, probably next January or February, so that you can sort of use that as well to introduce TOK to the rest of your staff. So I will design one for you as well later in the year or early next year. Okay, that's it. Those are the webinars coming up. I can see that I've already had a few questions. We've got quite a few people out there, which is really nice. I'm going to have a quick look at these questions, and hopefully, if they are not too tricky, I can answer them now. Otherwise, I will put them all in the debrief. So someone has said, you say that there can be multiple optional or core themes, but what I understand from the TOK guide, it must be one theme, one prompt, and 3 objects. Please clarify. No, it can be multiple optional or core themes. You can do a different theme for each object. Okay, remember what I've said. Each object can be discussed completely separately to the others. So the commentary is 950 words. It's probably better to see it as 300 odd word sort of paragraphs or sections. They do not have to interlink. They do not have to be in the same context. They can be completely separate from each other. That will probably make it easier for your students because they'll see that as, you know, not such an extended piece of work. To me, that would seem easier. On the other hand, if they want to interlink, they can interlink. If they want to do one context, they can. So you know, there's a lot of choice there. There's a lot of options for them. Will the IA prompts remain the same year to year? Yes, they will, as far as I know. I mean, maybe if there's one that proves very problematic, there may be some modifications, but I don't think that will happen. I mean, I'm obviously not the IB. I don't decide these things, but yes, they will stay the same for the next 7 years. We are doing the exhibition in year 1. Are you doing the 5 big question idea units in year 1? Yes, we are. That is the intention. Okay, so you're doing 5 big questions. Each one takes about 6 weeks. You know, you can cut it down depending on how much time you have. And then we just do the final one in year 2, and then they write the essay. Okay, I like to finish the course as soon as I can, because year 2 is very stressful for DP students. You know, they're doing so many other things. So I get them finished fairly early on in year 2. You know, we do 6 weeks or so of new content, but by that stage, you know, the essay titles have come out, and it's really hard to keep them going with things that might not relate that closely to the essay. They're already thinking, I want to be doing my essay, I want to be doing my essay. So I don't keep them doing new stuff for very long. So yes, I do the 5 big questions in year 1. One way of doing it, which is worth thinking about, is getting them to design and do their exhibitions and then deliver them in year 2. I think that gives you a little bit of time, and they won't have to do any new work when it comes to year 2. So I know a lot of schools are doing that. Next question. What would you advise to teachers dealing with the common issue of objects just illustrating instances of knowledge instead of manifesting interest? Couldn't quite read that, about the prompts knowledge issues. I mean, I think the key to objects and choosing objects, number one, make sure they have as specific a context as possible. Okay, so, you know, the IB themselves sort of say, you know, don't just do a church, do a specific church. Don't just do a copy of a science textbook. Do one that, you know, you have used yourself and maybe have annotated or something like that. So make it as specific as possible. Don't make it a generic object. Can't be a generic object. Secondly, make sure that it has a link to them, okay, a personal link, something that has resonated with them, something that has changed the way they think, something that they can own, something that belongs to them. And I think that will avoid the problems that you seem to be talking about. Yeah, I'll be happy to follow that up. If you have any more questions, you can email me about that. With schools being advised to select only 2 themes, how would you advise students who would prefer to focus their commentaries on one of the non-taught themes? Let them do it. You know, it'll be more work for you probably, because you'll have to guide them. I would caution them. You know, I would say to them, you know, this is what the IB recommend, and they recommend it for a good reason, because, you know, you have probably a better knowledge of the themes that we've looked at, rather than ones that you're just doing yourself. But this is the point of TOK, isn't it? You've got to give them freedom. And if it's a disaster, then you're going to have to say, this is not working, you know, go back and redesign. So you'll have to sort of nip that in the bud, I would say. But, you know, they should be given the freedom to do these things. If you are a member, are the webinars free to access rather than having to purchase? You get a discount. Okay, so any of the premium webinars, you get a 20% discount. Ask me and I'll send you a discount code. Yeah, so obviously that applies to any member. Will the recording of this webinar be available? That's an easy one to answer. Yes, it will. It takes a little while to sort of process and do various things too, and then it sort of appears on my desktop, and I will send you out the link and the presentation, and I will try and answer some. I'll try and write down some answers to these questions that I'm dealing with right now. How important is it to show some personal connection to the object by the student in their commentary? I think it's important because I think it helps them. They can talk about it much more easily. I think it becomes more meaningful. So I think, as I've said, it avoids them choosing a generic object. It helps them to demonstrate the way in which TOK concepts manifest in the real world. I just think it's helpful to them. I mean, that's what the IB have said about recommending they do the context in a theme. You know, they haven't just gone ahead and said, right, write your exhibition on anything, because they were worried that wouldn't be, students would have almost too much freedom. They wouldn't know what to do with that. So they've given that as a recommendation for them to make it easier for them to write the exhibition. And I think the same thing applies to the idea of a personal connection. It makes it easier for them to write about these things. Yeah, that's what I would say to that. Do we have to write a comment on the exhibition for the grade given before uploading to IB? And do we run it through Turnitin? I mean, you should definitely run it through Turnitin, I would say, but there's no form to fill in. Happily, this is one of the reasons why they've introduced the exhibition. You don't have to do anything like you did for the presentation, which involved a long planning document, which became the thing itself, which was really annoying. So no, there's nothing like that to do. So that's sort of the good news. I've got one question maybe on the chat. Oh, someone's saying thank you, which is very nice. Okay, so it is now 2 minutes to 12. We have almost finished on exactly 60 minutes. If anyone has any final questions, now's the time to throw them in my direction. Otherwise, I will try and respond to other questions that I might get via email in the debrief. You'll receive that, I hope, by the end of the day, and you'll have a link to this recording. So thank you very, very much for joining me. Yeah, hope you can join for the next ones. And when you get this presentation, by all means, go ahead and access the ones that I've uploaded to YouTube. So many thanks to all of you. And yeah, final reminder that if you are a member, you do get a discount for any of the premium webinars. So just write to me and I'll send you the discount. I do try and send that out in newsletters, but it doesn't always get there. Okay, thank you very much. Great to see you. Great to have you all from around the world involved in this. And I will see you at the next webinar. Goodbye.